is just a few clips last night from the interview with Megyn Kelly and the leader of Truth the Vote, Kathy Engelbright. Roll it.
And frankly, Megyn, the thought of having to sit before my accuser and be silent in the face of what he did, it was unconscionable.
What did he do?
And so, well, he filed over a period of months beginning in October of 2012. He filed 3 letters that he sent to me asserting that he was opening an investigation. He sent this on House Oversight and Government Reform letterhead. But the funny thing is, the way I found out about it was from an LA Times reporter who called for comment after the congressman had done quite a series of cable news shows talking about you know, what he believed to be the activities of True the Vote based on fundamentally flawed information.
On the subject of, you know, that you were there to testify on today, we went through the list with Congressman Jordan: 6 FBI visits, 2 ATF visits, personal audits, business audits, OSHA visits. You heard the exchange. Could this be a coincidence? It's either coincidence or it's paranoia, one or the other. Your thoughts?
I think it's the weaponizing of government, and I think that regardless of your political affiliations, we should all as Americans be very troubled by what we see happening, and I am a living example of exactly what really is happening. And I submit that this goes very deep into the West Wing of the White House.
Now, I want to point out that what she said about all Americans. Now, if you think there's division in this country, which there is and there always has been, and we could get into the fact that we once had a common enemy in the sense of the latter half, mid to latter half of the 20th century with communism, and that unified us, and also even those that weren't too vocal in the defense of what we stand for and who we are, still gave us a sense of what it meant to be an American and what it means to be an American. Now, I would argue that there are those who are well-intentioned and we see how the road to Hades is paved with well-intentioned, good intentions. And I would say that would be part of the peace movement as we understood in the 60s. And we also see that take the form in the economic debate in the Occupy Wall Street movement. Never a solution, by the way, with people advocating for these things. There's really not a solution. Their solution is either based on policies that have absolutely failed. How do you know? Well, how are things going right now? We're still 1 million+ jobs down from 6 years ago, in the sense of fewer people working. We have an unemployment rate that has taken the largest drop is due to people leaving the workforce. And we have a government that's $17 trillion in the hole. We have unfunded liabilities. And we have these entitlement programs that we are seeing, which make up part of the unfunded liabilities that we carry, are going broke, and they're really in their worst Ponzi schemes. In their best, they're not accounted for honestly. So, oh, and by the way, it was not the fact that Gorbachev didn't win the Cold War for us. It was Reagan who forced Gorbachev into defeat. Peace through strength, it works. And when we get beyond the juvenile arguments that are so often made in the sense of war bad, as if somebody is ever pro-war, we realize that the only way diplomacy works is if our enemies, the opposition, believes in the consequences that will follow if they do not take the route of diplomacy. And unfortunately, we still have people learning that lesson or attempting to learn that lesson and going through. And people can agree on when the threshold to put troops in harm's way and how to go about this. But if we don't recognize and listen to what, for example, the regime in Iran says, if we choose to ignore them, we're going to end up with more dead. If we choose to ignore the history of having peace in our time, we're going to end up in a place where people chose to believe and looked very short-sightedly at a growing threat. Today there's a willful blindness in dealing with that. Back to the economy and the sense of where we are today as Americans. And what Miss Engelbright, Catherine Engelbright, was speaking to as all Americans, why doesn't it offend us whether we were part of the organizations or not, even if some of you ideologically oppose the organizations that were targeted, pro-Israel, pro-Tea Party organizations, organizations that were advocating for a return for a federal government to go back to the Constitution, organizations that are not supportive of this very destructive takeover of the healthcare system. You can agree or disagree, but as an American, you wouldn't want a government agency, especially the one like of the IRS, to specifically target. And that's what we've learned. Why are we all offended by that? I say the same thing about Benghazi. I say the same thing about Fast and Furious. And I think what happens is, and I think we're all capable of this, not conservatives, not necessarily not liberals. We are all capable of this kind of blindness, which ends up, the result of it is to sacrifice liberty on the altar of politics, and one day that will bite each and every one of us. So I'm not making excuses. I understand how it can happen. But what she said about the weaponizing of government against opposition and should offend all Americans, paraphrasing, that's huge. It should offend everybody when a journalist asks for an interview and is and gets an agreement and the person doesn't follow through. What do I mean? I mean Nancy Pelosi being asked by Jesse Waters, producer for Bill O'Reilly, about a deal that Miss Pelosi made, the minority leader in the House, former House Speaker, Nancy Pelosi made with Bill O'Reilly. Here's part of the exchange yesterday in a press conference where Jesse Waters said, hey, you made a deal. Why aren't you going and having the interview with the president, or excuse me, with Bill O'Reilly? Roll it.
He ran into you at the Kennedy Center honors recently, and you said you'd do an interview with him. In fact, you said you'd do an interview in your office.
Yeah, but I already did Greta.
What we did...
I already did Greta. That's it for this year.
And I know you're a woman of
Greta
your
was
word.
right there. I've known her longer.
Because we've been calling your office, and you've said you've been busy in February, March, April,
We're
May,
never here.
June.
We're
So I'm
never
wondering, I know you're a woman of your word, and I'm asking you if you're going to be honoring your commitment.
Well, I didn't make any commitment to him. We were having a social conversation. In fact, it was at the White House. It's the first time I ever saw him, because I never see him on TV. But they... But then Greta came along, and I've known her for a very long time, and so I did Greta. And so, we go from one outlet to the next.
Your husband was there next to you. When
One
you
of
said
these
you would
days.
do the show.
This is open-ended. One of these days, maybe I will. I was not pleased with the disrespect that he showed to the president, so that wasn't like a warmer-upper.
What
But
was disrespectful?
it speaks for itself.
It speaks for itself, because don't you understand that I'm on the left and I can make just a statement that has no grounds and it's not backed with substance? No, I can just throw that out. I mean, Jesse, how'd you get in here, Jesse Waters? And that's unfortunately how it happens. And so what gets me about that is we should all be offended by that. Bill O'Reilly has the #1 show on television. Why on earth is, whether it's a Republican or Democrat, conservative, liberal, go wherever they are on the political spectrum if we want answers, and we certainly do. Because we have a lot of questions when we are told that you're going to find out what's in a bill, but you got to pass it so you can find out what's in it, and you make this 400,000 jobs claim, and we see jobs being killed by this. When we see the ledger, the record, and we hear the promises, we should all encourage people to be held to account, at least in the sense, and this is why elections matter. But your vote, your business, this is a buffet. You can take it or leave it. That's the beautiful thing about what we're doing here, Nothing But Truth and AFR Talk. The idea is, wait a second. If somebody you agree with was doing this, would you have a different opinion? I would not. Because if somebody I agreed with was behaving like this, I would want them to answer and explain. But I'd also understand that the feedback I was getting from a particular policy that was failing, be it foreign policy or in the realm of domestic policy, is important. And I have a responsibility through the lens of the Constitution and the recognition that our rights come from God and that we are created in His image and we are endowed by Him with certain unalienable rights, that I have to craft policy that works and actually fixes the problem. I think what frustrates so many Americans in the division that we see is that the feedback's in, the results are in, and yet we still do not have change. But I'm hoping. Cray and Durham's Nothing But Truth. We've got a lot of mo. On the flip side, happy Friday. AFR Talk.